Good evening, chaps. We've got not one, but two very special guests for you tonight. I'm very excited to speak to them. It's Dr. Arturo Cifuentes, who has more than 30 years of experience in the financial world and has taught at Columbia University, the University of Southern California, and the University of Chile, and his co-author, Dr. Ventura Charlin, the sole owner and principal of VC Consultants. She's a seasoned applied statistician and finance and quantitative marketing research analyst who has published extensively in peer-reviewed journals. So they've got a great track record. They've just published a new book called The Worth of Art. It has now appeared on the market. You can post your undoubtedly highly intelligent questions in the chat. We've already received a few, and we'll be answering throughout the show. So thank you, Arturo. Thank you, Ventura. Thank you for being with us tonight.
Thank you for inviting us.
Now, before we talk about the book, and it is a very interesting book, I want my audience to get to know you a little better. So could you maybe tell them about how you came to love art?
Well, I give my take here. If you live in New York, Cheyenne, you end up loving art, I think, unless you are very insensitive because you have great museums and you have the opportunity to see many shows. So we have been here in New York for more than 30 years, I guess. So we have visited pretty much all the museums here and exhibitions. And I would say, people in London may dispute this, but I think New York is the financial capital of the world and the art capital. So the two things come together natural here in New York, I would say. Yeah. I don't know.
I certainly kind of really share the same opinion. We've been going to museums together, so it's a kind of a shared passion for art.
Yes, and that passion really comes through when you read the book, even though there's a lot of financial discussion as well. I mean, you need to have a basic familiarity with statistics and financial concepts to sort of understand what the arguments you're making, although you do provide a very nicely titled appendix for poets at the end of it, which I love that euphemism. That's a great euphemism.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you like it. We thought some people could be offended by that. I'm glad you like it.
Yeah. You explain the basic ideas behind linear regression and some of the other expressions and terms and methods in your book, and that's very useful. Now, you discuss like a lot of different concepts in the book. You talk about art secured lending, you talk about auction guarantees, but tonight I really want to help the beginning collector, because the art market can seem very unpredictable, and it can be quite daunting to start investing in art as a beginning collector. Especially, we've got a lot of sort of tech bros now who are quite intelligent, and they will understand what you're saying in the book, but they have no idea about art. It's quite daunting. So what would your advice be to someone who's just stepping into that world? Like, what are the basic things you should know before you start collecting art?
Well, I mean, a number of things, yeah, but to make it short, if you want to buy some, my short advice would be don't buy anything you don't like, okay? Because you might end up holding a piece of art that might be worthless, and if you hate it, you're going to have to look at it for the rest of your life. But what provided in a book, which I think is useful, I think we provide certain basic elements that can be useful to make some basic calculations. For example, what has been the typical return? What can you expect? For example, if you have stocks and bonds and you add a little bit of art, how that can diversify your portfolio. And those would be another things. I mean, but in addition to that, there are a number of other qualitative things you should look into if you buy a piece of art.
By starting, first of all, right now, you have to have a lot of money to buy kind of the old or the more established. I would say if you want to start, first of all, you you visit galleries, you visit museums, you go to exhibitions, you go to fairs, and kind of start looking at different things and hearing the opinion of other people, and kind of looking at something, see if you like it or you don't like it, or speaks to you in some way or not. First of all, kind of start kind of getting to know art, and then as you that inquire about the artist, about kind of the story behind the artist, why this was painted. Ask questions at the gallery. They're very, I would say galleries are a little bit kind of threatening to people.
Stuffy.
Yeah. Yeah. But on the other hand, I think people are very, the people at galleries, on the other hand, usually want to help you, want to answer your questions, want to talk about the artists. So don't be afraid. Ask questions.
No, you mentioned also, Shayan, something interesting, because when people are talking about a collection, I mean, that from a financial point of view involves a little bit the concept of diversity, having several things. Yeah. So in that sense, today it might be easier to be a diversified investor than say 20 years ago. And I'll give you an example. Yeah. If you think, I mean, a good Picasso painting could fetch $50, $100 million. So if you're thinking about putting together a diversified portfolio of that nature, you might need to pony up maybe $1 billion, which probably it's a tall order for most people. Yeah. Fortunately, today, there is a new concept that is taking some momentum, which is called, well, there are different names, but basically it's called fractional ownership. So the idea is that you have an expensive painting and several people buy shares in that painting. So the same way you would buy, for example, Microsoft stock or in any other company. So you become an owner of a fraction of the painting. So that way, you can create a diversified pool of holdings, different styles, different artists, different geographical location, whatever you want to call it. Yeah. And then you can build a diversified pool with a more, I don't want to say modest, but more reasonable investment. Yeah.
But yeah, the only thing is you won't have the art in your living room.
Yes, if you only own a fraction of a painting, it's going to be in a storage facility somewhere, right?
Exactly.
Well, you can have a poster and maybe with an FTL that it gives you some bragging rights. You say you can have you own a fraction of it. Yeah, I mean, it might count for something. Yeah,
kind of a stamp or something.
Yeah, but it is a very interesting. You immediately touch on this interesting subject. I love it, because do you think this will really take off? Because I feel like you need to be a bit of a Philistine to invest, like, considerably in art, but then not have it on the wall, or like not be able to enjoy it yourself.
Well, I mean,
you're right.
Yeah, you're right. You don't get the bragging rights if you have actually, it could be a certificate in a piece of paper. It could be an FTL. I mean, that's not really an NFT. It's not really the critical thing. But the critical point is that in any other market, you have this concept of fractional ownership. I mean, you buy that's the way you invest in stocks, in bonds, even in real estate. I mean, you can invest in a real estate trust. So I don't think there is any theoretical or legal impediment to go ahead with this idea. I think it's gonna take off. It's a matter of time. Yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, bragging rights, I get that if you buy a Damien Hirst or something, you do it purely for bragging. But, if you have like a really good Picasso or a nice Renoir, you do it also for the aesthetic enjoyment, of course.
Well, absolutely. I mean,
absolutely.
Absolutely. I mean, we have never bought anything we don't like because, as I said, I mean, if you buy something because you expect to make some money, and then turns out to be a bad investment, and on top of that, you have to look at it, which it will remind you every single day that you made a mistake. I think that's a very awful proposition. Yeah?
But on the other hand, as I'm saying, if you have a more modest budget, a more limited budget, you can still buy things for your enjoyment and start a collection. And maybe some of those artists will become good. Kind of might be emerging artists.
But and there is also something interesting. I mean, which goes beyond the monetary part. I mean, let's say you invest in venture capital in a startup, and 20 years, that investment turns out to be very satisfactory. Yeah, that's fine. I mean, you get a lot of money, but I think there is certain pleasure, yeah, in having been able to discover something. So if you buy something from an artist today that nobody knows, and 20 years from now or 30 years from now, there's going to be a big financial success because the market recognizes the merits, I think there is a pleasure that goes beyond the monetary part and say, I got it. Yeah, before everybody I was there. So I think you get a kick out of that. Yeah.
Yeah, that does give a certain thrill. And Ventura sort of touched on a good point there when you were talking about, and you too, just emerging artists, because the most important attribute of an investment, as you point out in the book, is the return.
Yeah.
And with many of the established artists, it's just, there is a question mark of the, are you going to get your money's worth back, adjusted to inflation? But
Yeah.
with emerging artists, you can make a really good profit, relatively
Yeah.
speaking.
And again, with emerging artists, it's like venture capital. Okay, you might buy from 10 different ones, and one of those might be very successful. All the other ones might not. But you like them all. The important part is whatever you buy, you better like it.
But actually, you made a very good point, Cheyenne, which is the following. Yeah, people, I mean, perhaps people were not very close to their market. For example, they know the blue chips name, right? The Impressionist. Yeah. The Impressionists, all in all, have been a terrible investment in the last 20 years. Yeah, I mean, I don't have anything against the investment, the Impressionists, but if you look at the returns of the last 20 years, for example, Renoir, it has not been a very attractive investment.
No.
Leaving aside the prices, I mean, one thing is the price you pay, the other is the return. On the other hand, for example, artists which are very successful and very good, perhaps not household names for people who are a little bit removed from the market, for example, Zhao Wuki or Richter, the returns have been extraordinary. I mean, like 20-30% per year. So there is certainly a lot more potential in discovering, if I could use the word, an artist before it becomes a household name, and that's where the returns are. Yeah, high prices and returns do not go together well. Yeah, I mean, the impressionists, certain impressionists command very high prices, but the returns have not been very attractive. I mean, in fact, for the last 20 years, probably you have been better off buying the SP 500 rather than investing in the impressionist, for example.
Okay, so my audience, they want to know, how do you then go about constructing a well-diversified portfolio of young artists, and how do you estimate the chances of success and the chances of failure? Because you developed some very interesting methods in your book, so we are very keen to hear about this.
Well, I mean, it's very difficult, that's for sure. Yeah, I would be very reluctant to give a recipe to come up with that, because this is the same as I said, investing in a private equity or some startup. But if you have a diversified pool of assets, which is the same thing you would do if you were to invest in several software companies, things like that. If you have a diversified pool, probably you will do reasonably well. Now you have the eye to catch somebody before it becomes famous. Obviously, that's a lot better. Yeah. But I will be very reluctant to give you a recipe like a clear-cut recipe, Cheyenne. Yeah, what we have done in the book is to provide the tools rather than giving you tips. I mean, regarding precise names.
The whole thing also, our analysis are with what you would call secondary market artists, which is established, well known, that sell publicly in public auctions. So what you see in terms of prices paid for the art is real. Nobody's telling, oh, I think that such and such paid such and such for a piece of art. These are public, they pay taxes. And the other thing is, these are very vetted pieces of art because they have to have provenance. They have to have a certificate of how well maintained is the piece, etc. So there's a lot that goes behind these pieces of art that are sold in auctions, which is the basis for all our analysis.
Well, which in a way makes investing in art, I would say, a little bit more challenging, but more interesting than buying stock, right? I mean, if you buy stock, any company in the S&P 500, which is highly regulated, you don't really have to do any due diligence in a way. I mean, you can buy the stock, it's going to be properly under the control of a custodian, and that's it, yeah, in general. Now, if you buy a painting, beyond the fact that you might like or dislike the painting, there are certain other things you have to do. I mean, you have to do, as Ventura said, there is provenance, basically the resume of the painting, the origin, where does it come from, is it in good condition, has the painting, are there legal issues? For example, maybe the painting was taken without paying taxes out of the country in a not very clean fashion. I mean, maybe the painting that might surprise some people. I mean, some paintings are not what they seem to be. I'm going to tell you a joke that you're going to laugh at this, but you know, Courbet is estimated that he painted around 3,000 paintings, yeah, and around 4,000 are in museums. So the 3,000, 4,000 are in the museum. So you got to be careful. Sometimes you might buy something that looks real and ain't so. So the due diligence, it's a little bit more extensive than the due diligence you would need to do in case you were buying stocks or a mutual fund. Yeah, that makes it more interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, but sometimes forgeries are even better than the real paintings.
Oh, sometimes they are.
Well, you know, it's very interesting you mentioned that because, for example, a few years ago here at the Met in New York, there was an exhibition called Rembrandt or No Rembrandt. Yeah. So they have paintings by Rembrandt, in which basically meant that everybody agreed it was a Rembrandt. Yeah. Then there were paintings in which the attribution was kind of divided. I mean, some of them look pretty good, others not so good. Some of them were painted by Rembrandt, a part of it, and the other was the studio or a copy of Rembrandt. So you got to see all the different varieties of Rembrandt, the Rembrandt market, so to speak. But that could be, I mean, in fact, some fakes have been so good that they have fooled many experts. Yeah?
Yes, certainly. And they continue to fool many experts.
Exactly.
Now, I like how you state in the book that financially speaking, paintings are like very expensive real estate. And so one of the basis terms, you introduce a new financial metric basically for the art market, which you call APV.
Yes.
Or artistic power value. And I saw you had some articles published before which also use this term. is basically based on the price per unit of area. So in your case, it's dollars per square centimeter.
That's correct.
Many art historians will find that, like, this is blaspheming. Like,
Absolutely, they hate it. Yeah, they feel offended. Yeah.
but I will sacrifice my reputation here and say that I think it's actually a really good attract. And of course, it doesn't always work, but generally speaking, it is a very good metric. Can you explain this idea a little bit?
Well, I mean, it's a recognition. I mean, I think you bring a very good point. But I mean, some people feel offended if you talk about finance and art in the same sentence, or actually money. Yeah, I mean, which is a more kind of low-class term for finance. But the reality is, finance and art have been going together since the very beginning. Yeah, I mean, after all, an artist has to make a living. Yeah. Now, if you consider that the canvas, I mean, a painting is basically a two-dimensional object, I don't think, despite of the reluctance of art historians to look at this, but I don't think it's unreasonable to look at the price based on those terms. In fact, I could go even further. If you look at that metric, for example, we have been able, looking at that metric, dollars per centimeter square, to validate some opinions made by art historians or art critics, and also to contradict others, to see that, basically to see where the opinions of the experts were in tune with the financial market or were in disagreement. And I think that's very interesting, because it's sort of it helps you to look at this from a different point of view. Yeah.
Yeah, and so then using APV, your method, what kind of things can you discover if you use that metric?
For example, you can look at certain themes in a particular artist, and which themes are more valued than others, for example. Okay. Going to Cézanne, for example, or Renoir. In Renoir, my understanding is that with people, things are more expensive than without people. Okay, for example. So if you divide what has been sold and look at their APVs, that's something. Okay. Landscapes by Renoir are more appreciated if they're vertical as opposed to horizontal. And that's also very interesting. And in general, for Renoir, vertical paintings are more appreciated than horizontal. Like,
well, Monet also is another interesting case, because Monet, I mean, a big part of his paintings, and this comes from the critics as well, or anyone who can look at the painting, is the way he plays with the light. Yeah, for example, he painted the Rouen Cathedral like 40 or 60 times at different times of the day, because the light was different. Yeah, so you could see different combination of shades and sunshine. The same with the haystacks. Yeah. Now, and he considered himself, well, he wouldn't say this, a master of light, but it was his passion. Now, if you look at Monet paintings, in which the light, basically painted outdoors, play the dominant role, the APV is much, much higher than still lifes, which are painted indoors, in which light plays no games whatsoever. Yeah, I mean, you are inside the room, and you have basically a couple of glasses and a pop, yeah? And the light is always the same. So that kind of thing, it's interesting to see how the market reacts to that. Yeah, so you can say, as Ventura said, I mean, you can spot different trends regarding the paintings, just looking at the prices. And it's interesting to see that the market sometimes validates the opinions of the critics, and sometimes it doesn't. Yeah, I mean, well, a typical case is Joseph Albers, for example. Well, he was not a critic; he was an artist. Yeah, but the market disagree with him completely regarding his theory of color, yeah? For example. Yeah?
And then, for example, I think you point out in the book that with Renoir, if there are like portraits included of people that he knew, they tend to be worth more. But then if there are nudes or landscapes involved, they'll be worth less, which was like a shock to me because I thought nudes were always so popular with art collectors.
Well, I mean, but if you look at the numbers, I mean, see, sometimes it's surprising. I mean, you might find it more appealing aesthetically, but the market, sometimes might disagree with you a little bit, and that's fine. I mean, that's what makes the market, I guess, right?
Yes. Now, for me personally, reading the book, the most fascinating thing was this idea of life cycle curves that you
Yes.
sort of dig into, because they remind me a little bit of fast and slow life history strategies, in the sense that you make a distinction between conceptual or revolutionary and experimental artists, and then you find that the curves of these artists, they follow very different patterns, which you can categorize. So, for example, Monet had a like extraordinarily late life peak. So could you maybe tell the audience a bit about this and what can you find out about artists using these curves?
Well, I can talk a little bit. If you look at, for example, Picasso, okay, and look at his curve, the curves, you have like three peaks, I think, if I think about.
Mhm.
But the most important one is the early one, when the time when he painted the Demoiselle
D'Avignon.
Demoiselle d'Avignon. Okay, that time it's the peak in terms of the APV, and then there's another small peak, but it's all going down when he painted Marie-Thérèse and Dora Maar.
And the other guy, which is the opposite of Picasso, is Cézanne. Yeah, Cézanne basically, well, I mean, people might be offended by this. He's painted always the same thing, right? I mean, and he painted many times, but essentially it was the same technique, the same kind of thing, and he got better and better as he grew older. And in fact, a Cézanne painting that he made close to the end of his career is much more valuable than the painting done at the beginning. So it's the opposite of Picasso. Yeah, he was really an experimentalist, getting better and better, doing the same thing all over again.
Also painting even the same scenes. He has different points in his life. He painted Mont Saint-Victoire several times along his career, in a sense. And the later paintings are more valued than the earlier ones.
This is very interesting to me because, like, in evolution, in biology, you have this idea of like fast life history strategy, which means like a creature is characterized in that case by early maturation, like a high number of sexual partners and conquests, to whom it's less attached, and like less parenting of offspring. And this like corresponds perfectly to Picasso's like private life. Like he would go from woman to woman to woman, making all of them miserable. And like he was like a fast life history person. And like in interesting ways, his art corresponds to that, because you say he's got these two other peaks when he makes these like terrible paintings of Dora Maar, etc. But with
they're very
Cézanne,
appreciated.
sorry,
They're highly appreciated anyway.
they are. I mean, she looks just miserable. That's what I mean.
Yeah.
Well, he made them miserable, but from a financial point of view, some of them were very attractive. I mean, for example, again, I mean, since we're talking about Picasso women, I mean, if you look at the paintings of the different women, the prices are quite different, actually. For example, Marie-Thérèse, in terms of dollars per centimeter square, is a lot more expensive than Jacqueline. The returns tell a different story. I think Dora Maar
Is the best.
Yeah, in terms of returns.
Dora Maar gives you the best returns.
And why is that? Have you found out why that is? Is that because of a lot of feminist scholarship lately, or why is that?
What we did is looked only at paintings of women. So within the paintings of women that have been sold, we found out what we're telling you.
That's so interesting.
And he painted women a lot.
Oh, yeah, I mean, probably more than half of his paintings actually are women, lovers and others, but or maybe in between. Yeah, certain cases are not really very clear, but he painted more women than other topics in general. Yeah, at least. Well, let me rephrase that. If you look at the stuff that had been sold in the market in the last 30 years, that's the breakdown. There are more women than no women.
I think that's also something about the appeal of the market. That's what it's being transferred in a sense.
Okay, so guys, just be careful when you buy Picasso. Make sure it's a Dora Maar, because they are more valuable. They make
yeah, I mean,
if you like Picasso.
And then of course with like slow life history strategists, they are like people who invest in their growth and who are experimental. And so I'm not sure about the sexual activities of like a person like Cézanne or Manet, but maybe they were more laid back than Picasso, and they had a sort of long-term plan.
Well, that's a tricky.
I don't know. Let me think about Cézanne. Cézanne kind of had a difficult relationship with his parents, and then started painting against the will of his father. He had a very difficult relationship with him, and then had this relationship with this woman who eventually he married, but didn't get along with her. So he was difficult as a person also. So I think he painted alone a lot.
But it would be an interesting line of research, which I'm not going to embark particularly on these days. Yeah, exploring the relationship between the artist and the women, because it could be misinterpreted and be very tricky. But just to give you a counter example, I mean, Magritte. I mean, if you had met Magritte on the street, you would have thought he was a banker or an insurance salesperson. Yeah, I mean, he was very conventional. Was married always to the same woman. Lived in Paris for a few years, didn't like it, went back to Brussels. I mean, he was very conventional and very bourgeois in terms of the schedule, the way he dressed and he lived. So it's an interesting proposition, Cheyenne. Yeah, but it maybe for another book, I guess. Yeah.
Well, I think just going on those like two examples that you discussed, I think we can state that like incels, like sexually frustrated young men who are not as successful with women as Picasso, they have their late life peak when they're in their 60s.
Yeah, perhaps. Maybe, yeah, I mean, and if you add mental instability and problems, I mean, think about Monk, for example. I mean, you have a win-win combination there.
So can you just like quickly, just the artists on top of your mind, which ones, which if you think of like artists working today, which names come up? Just say names.
You mean artists that
are alive today?
That are alive and producing artworks right now.
Well, okay. I would like to think about artists that died recently. Yeah, I really love Lucian Freud and Francis Bacon. Yeah, true, they are dead. Yeah, but they are kind of contemporary artists. I mean, I think both are great, each one in its own way. Yeah.
Yes, but the question I was going to ask you is, of these sort of great artists or the most successful, financially speaking, artists who work today, which category they would fall in, like experimental or revolutionary?
That's a very interesting question. I haven't thought about
I-
that,
I
but
haven't- I haven't thought either.
but
The reason why I asked
but
that is
You
because
would have to look at the data.
it's but think of, I mean, for example, okay, Basquiat, yeah, again, died recently, but it's a contemporary artist, yeah. Basquiat was very successful, and it's a little bit tricky in a certain way because to me he always painted the same thing, yeah. I mean, if you look at the paintings, they are very, very similar. I mean, a couple of it's pretty much the same thing,
Yeah.
but they were different than anything done before. So, in a certain way, you could say he was revolutionary.
Yeah.
Now, some of the, I mean, for example, well, this is my opinion. You might have a different view, but for example, I mean, San Francis, to me, it's the same thing as everything that was done. I mean, he painted the same thing, and
But-
I don't think he was very revolutionary in a certain
But I
sense.
think, for example, George Kondo talks to me, and I find him kind of revolutionary.
He has a
Okay.
Picasso sort of.
I every time I look at his paint, I go into a gallery and see a painting by him, and I say, "Oh, there he is." Okay, it kind of, I recognize him and I understand him. So I think that he has done something very special. I don't know what age he is, to tell you the truth.
He's probably in the
Late 50s, late
probably
50s or
60s, yeah.
60s. So I don't know where he's at in terms of his life, and I don't know what happened before. So who knows?
So, for example, an artist that I could say he's alive, yeah, Alex Katz. I think he's probably early 90s or turned 90 very recently. I would say he's an experimentalist, yeah, because if you look at his painting, except that the ones he did when he was very young, they retain sort of the same flavor. Yeah, I don't mean to say that in a negative way, but his techniques and the way he approaches even the portraits and landscapes, I would say, is very, very similar. Yeah.
How about David Hockney?
David Hockney, that's an interesting one.
I think
Well, certain artists are neither one. I mean, we are talking about Picasso was a very clear revolutionary. Yeah, it was very clear cut, like a black and white textbook case. Cézanne was the opposite, but there are many artists.
Monet had a peak in the beginning and another peak at the end. So he's a hybrid, and you
Yeah.
have these hybrid people.
And of course, you mentioned Hockney in the book, and you got this strange diagram which is like all over the place.
Yeah, and then you have the swimming pools, and then you have these green sort of landscapes from Northern California or England. Yeah, it's some artists are kind of in between. I mean, yeah.
Yes.
Many artists actually they have changed their style or what they do. I mean, for example, Lucian Freud, he painted in a certain way. And at one point, even he changed the thickness of the brush and changed the style. I mean, the late Freuds are quite different than the early Freud. Yeah. So it's many people are kind of in between. Yeah.
Yes. Early Freud, of course, is like quite elegant, a bit neurotic, very sort of attention for detail, whereas late Freud is like very meaty, like these huge nude figures.
Exactly, yeah, fleshy with the thick, the painting thick, and the brush. It's more almost voluminous, yeah, which you don't see that in the early paintings. Are very, as you said, meticulous, almost hyper realist. Yeah.
There is, of course, a real so important reason why I asked this, because from your book I learned that this is so very important for when you're investing in one particular artist. Like if they are experimental, it might be worth actually investing in a late work by the
Absolutely.
But with someone like Damien Hirst, I would think that most of his important work was done maybe 20 years ago.
Yeah, you're being very forgiving in that statement, Cheyenne. Yeah. No, I think, well, I mean, I'm not an art critic, but I could put him on the marketing side rather than the artistic side of the business.
No, well, that's the thing. He's been very clever, and like people like him, they now sell artworks for all like wallets. So he'll produce like £5 mugs with his signature, so that even like if you're a student who's broke, you can buy something from Damien Hirst. And this seems very charming, but the effect is that people won't actually buy like second-rate artists anymore, emerging artists, because the prominent ones, they dominate the entire spectrum, the entire width of the art market, and that's a very worrisome development, I think.
Yeah, you're right. I don't know.
It's a yeah, it goes to the boundaries of art, I think. Yeah, it's
Personally, I have almost no opinion of Damon Hirst.
well, I do, but I will not voice it here. Yeah.
Well, hey, this is a free speech platform. You can voice.
No, I know. I'm not concerned about you. I mean, but I mean, if I say something, they're not gonna go after. They're not gonna go after you. Yeah. No, it's not my cup of tea. I mean, let's leave it there. Yeah.
Yes, of course. No, you're a gentleman, of course.
Mhm.
Now, in the book, you don't really touch all that much on old master paintings. I mean, you do discuss impressionist artists. What's the reason for that? Do you think it's still wise investing in golden age painters if you can afford it, or do you think that's really a dead market and that's not where the future is?
It's kind of not very popular or among people who buy at auctions. And since the data we use is at auctions, and the other thing is that most good pieces of old masters are in museums. They're not in private hands. So the probability that they come into the market is much lower. Every now and then you have a good old master. You have a lot of kind of, and the other thing is much more difficult with provenance. So I would say that auctions of old masters are smaller, of good old masters.
But as Ventura said, I mean, our book was based on data from the secondary market. I mean, the stuff that is being sold, and very few old masters reach the market every year. For example, I mean, if you have in mind, there have been 5 El Grecos sold in the last 10 years, roughly. And if you look at them and you compare them with what you have in a museum, and I'm not talking about the Met or the British Museum, I mean, just a regular museum, they're very second class, I mean, in terms of quality, yeah. So all the good stuff has been taken already. So it's extremely unlikely that you will find a good Rembrandt or a Rubens or I mean, in a secondary market right now. I mean, it's very difficult. Museums also, I mean, it's not that the museums want to sell it, yeah, but many museums, in fact, most of them, even if they wanted to sell a painting, which sometimes they do in order to fill a vacuum in the collection, most of the paintings they cannot sell them for legal reasons. Yeah, so I would say the market for the old masters is well. And the other thing, okay, millennials, let's say anyone younger than 40 or 45, they don't really have a lot of appetite for religious topics. Yeah, I mean, in general, yeah, I mean, and that's a different conversation. But the fact is that religious topics do not really command a great deal of appreciation these days. Yeah,
That's true. Maybe 20 or 30 years ago, you could still like sell paintings with angels and annunciations and
Yeah.
themes like that. But now when I buy old master paintings, which I sometimes do, I will never go for those themes because it's much harder to find a market for them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But so let's not look at the past. Let's look towards the future. And at the end of the book, you discuss briefly art created by software, like AI-based algorithms. And I've personally sort of used Midjourney and Stable Diffusion, and you can make these beautiful images. Now, I can imagine that on the basis of your findings and future research, an artist would just have to insert the right properties. For example, make a painting dominantly blue and not gray or something, or brownish. And then if they insert those properties, they can make like nice artworks with AI, which will sell maybe for reasonable sums. How do you think it will affect the art world? And I feel like you'll both be writing another book about this in 5 years' time. Maybe.
Well, maybe in 5 years or maybe in 10 years. I don't know. Yeah, but your question, Cheyenne, is very interesting for two reasons. Yeah, the first one is your question raises an issue which is more philosophical. It's a piece of art made. Okay, let me rephrase it. Does a piece of art need to be made by a human being in order to be art? I mean, the evidence is kind of shaky there because, for example, there was a French company that they developed some software that created the portrait of
Bellamy.
Yeah,
Edmond Bellamy.
Edmond Bellamy. Yeah, Edmond Bellamy was supposed to be sold, and initially the estimate was around, if I remember correctly, around $10,000. Yeah,
7 to 10,000.
Yeah, and it went for more than 400. Yeah, so clearly there is a level of appreciation for something made by a combination of humans and software. Yeah. Now, whether art is going to be developed by software in the future without human intervention, well, that's a different thing. But still, somebody has to develop the software. But
yeah, there has to be some human intervention at some point.
Maybe the art is going to be in the software.
In the code.
I thought that the portrait of Edmond de Bellamy
was an algorithm.
Of course, like Bellamy, the surname was like a reference to Goodfellow.
It was a player game. It was a French company. So the Bellamy, which comes from Bellamy, was a real playing words. But it was a software. It was a software that developed apparently they look at several paintings. I mean, actual portraits of people, and the software came up with that product that you saw.
And it wasn't good. I didn't find it a good art. First of all,
it was very brownish. I mean, and a little bit not very appealing, actually. But
so I will have to disagree with you there. I think, of course, the face was blurry, and like there was like the head was cut off, and like there were these compositional problems. But I thought there was something gigantically touching about having this blurry face, and you can like, if the face is not clear, you can like you can fill in the sort of your brain, and it's like almost just to think that figure came out of algorithms. There's something enchanting about that. There's something pioneering. That's kind of the Faustian spirit speaks through that image. And maybe it's not great art, but as a sort of singular example of AI-derived art, it is pretty interesting.
No, it is. I mean, I didn't like the colors. Yeah, to me, it was very brownish for my taste. But again, that's a personal view. I mean, but I think it's going to happen that you're going to have software helping you to do certain things. I mean, that's a reality. Yeah.
And what's more, I think it was a great investment because it was sold for like more than 400,000. But then again, it's got a long Wikipedia page now, and I'm sure that when it's sold next, it will be sold for much more than that.
I'm sure, yeah.
Probably.
Because it's the first one.
Yes. Now, okay, we've got a little time left. Yeah. Is there anything in your book that you are unsatisfied with, or like any part of the book which you think deserves much more written about?
Well, I think, but this is only speculation. I mean that some of the things we use in the market in the book as techniques could be extended to many other markets. Yeah, there we have a chapter in which we talk about wines, violins, and classic cars. Yeah, but you can extend that treatment to many other things. I mean, not necessarily art, like stamps, coins. I mean, any collectibles basically.
Watches.
I mean, that would be an interesting topic perhaps for the future or the next generation again.
Yeah, it's fantastic how, because with a lot of those books, you feel like, are the claims really true? Am I being scammed? But in your book, you lay out all the sort of mathematics behind your reasoning, so people can sort of trace the results themselves, which
Yes.
makes it such a good book. I think it's the best book on this topic that I've read. And so the worth of art, financial
Thank
tools.
you very much. Yeah.
Well, I mean it. I'm sincere. Financial tools in the art markets. I think everyone who's interested in like the financial market, art market, they should pick up this book. And there are different chapters about different subjects, so you can just go straight to the chapter that is applicable to you. Now, before we go to the audience questions, I've got 7 questions which I ask each of my guests, and this is my favorite part of the show. So my first question, and you can both answer this: what is one book that everyone should read, apart from this book, of course?
Apart from this, well, I love Shakespeare, so I would recommend Hamlet to everybody. Anyone below 30 certainly should read Hamlet. And the other one, I'm going to cheat. I'm going to give you 2 books, Cheyenne. 100 Years of Solitude. It's a book by Garcia Marquez, a Colombian writer. Those 2, I think, should be on top of the list.
That's great. Can I just ask why Hamlet and not Othello or, Midsummer?
Hamlet has everything: dysfunctional families, crime, love, revenge, bad words, great sentences. It has it all.
Yes. And Ventura, what about you?
I would recommend Siddhartha, Hermann Hesse's book. It was important to me
Yes.
when I was growing up.
Did you read it in English?
I read it in Spanish.
Okay.
It took a while to come up in English, but I read it when I was about 12, and I really liked it.
Those are such good suggestions. The second question: who's your favorite artist and why?
Ooh.
Francis Bacon, Lucian Freud, and Bosch. He was way ahead of his time. Yeah.
Well, I like Mark Rothko. I like Bosch too. Actually, when I met Arturo, we both were much like we really talked about Bosch. And at my parents' house, my father had a book with
Bosch.
With Bosch, Hieronymus Bosch.
That's so interesting, because Bosch is like this solitary figure, and like no one.
Yeah, he was completely disconnected, uncorrelated with the rest of the whatever was going on. I mean, he was very unique, very different than the rest of the artists of his time.
Yes, and of course Bruegel followed in his footsteps,
Yes.
but that was a little later. What's your favorite painting and why?
My favorite painting, well, there are quite a few, but Olympia, Manet's Olympia would be a favorite one. Yeah. Actually, she's in New York right now. We saw her yesterday.
Yeah, we saw it at the Met. I like the Garden of Early Delights by Hieronymus Bosch. I think it has all these things that you can discover every time you look at it, the tiny details. I really like it.
I totally agree. If I could only preserve 5 paintings for eternity, that one would be on the list. It's absolutely unique.
Well, I have a painting of a Bosch, the Garden of the Early Delights. I have it in Chile in my office, at the university.
A copy.
A copy, of course, a copy. A good copy, but it's a copy,
Does it inspire you when you do financial
It
analysis?
inspires me. Yeah, I mean, I love it when I get there early in the morning and I see these things. It gives you a good jolt of energy.
Fantastic. I love it. Now, question number 4. What's your favorite piece of architecture?
You know, I, I, my father was a structural engineer. He designed bridges. So I developed very early a fondness for bridges. I mean, the Golden Gate in San Francisco, I think is a beautiful piece of engineering and architecture. And to be fair to you, since you're in Europe, there is a bridge, which we have seen it together, actually, the one in Lisbon, which is very similar to the Golden Gate, is the same suspended bridge, is red. I think it's the bridge in the river next to Lisbon.
It's the 25th of April bridge call.
25th?
25th
Okay,
of
that bridge
April.
is the bridge in Lisbon. You can probably, it's a beautiful bridge. It's very similar to the Golden Gate. I mean,
in my case, I also love bridges. I learned through him to like them more than buildings. And I can tell you the other favorite piece that for me was very important when anytime I flew out and came back to New York was the two towers.
The Twin Towers. No?
Yeah. Seeing the towers, it was something. You could see them some days, going some clouds, and on top of the clouds, part of it, I really missed them.
Yes. Of course, the bridge you were talking about was the 25th of April bridge, right? Which was originally called the Salazar Bridge.
Yeah,
Yes,
exactly.
yes.
Well, it was the Salazar, but since Salazar was a dictator, I think they changed the name from something more palatable. Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, informally we refer to him as the Salazar Bridge, but I think
Yeah.
you're right. It's the 25th of April. That's the. When did they change the name?
I don't know.
Salazar.
I know it was inaugurated in like 1966.
Yeah.
And of course, Salazar was still in power then. And he's still weirdly popular now. I mean, compared to the other fascist dictators, he's got not such a bad reputation in Portugal.
Yeah.
Well, he's not as well known, shall we say, as Franco or others, but so it was a PR thing. I mean,
But I agree, bridges can be like wonders of engineering, and I'm very much in awe of the work that went into them. Question number 5. What's a realization that really changed your life or career?
well, in my case, the thing that changed my life and career, Cheyenne, was I was living in Chile in my 20s. I mean, during the Pinochet dictatorship, and I got a fellowship to go to Caltech. So that changed my life in more than one way. I'm still very grateful to that opportunity. So that to me really changed my life in a very significant way.
My case, coming to America from Chile was life-changing. It opened my eyes to everything.
Can you please?
Latin American society for a woman is kind of very special. It's much more confining. I came to this country in the 1980s, and I discovered that I could be much freer than I was before.
Well, we came to the US as students. We didn't know anybody here. I mean, nothing. We found in this country much more opportunities than in Chile. We found people to be very friendly, very open-minded. Americans are very generous people, yeah. So I'm both very grateful to that. And also the fact that we came here at the time Chile had a dictatorship, a military dictatorship. We had been there for 7 years. Obviously, it was like a fresh, breathing fresh air for the first time in 7 years. I mean,
Yeah.
I take your point, but then when I meet South Americans, especially Chileans, Argentinians, Brazilians, they are very warm, they're very giving. And maybe that's not always the case with Europeans or Americans to the same degree.
Do you think so? I have found, well, I haven't lived in Europe. I visited Europe many times, but I haven't lived there. But my experience after living in the US is that Americans are very generous. Even New Yorkers, actually, New Yorkers are very generous and friendly people, Cheyenne. That might shock you, but New Yorkers have a very good heart.
Okay, well, that's great to hear. Question number 6. What's a quote that you really like?
Well, I'll give you a one that is depressing, perhaps. I love Shakespeare, so I'm going back to Macbeth. Life is a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. Well, you might think it's not very optimistic, but it's like a tango, yeah. But I like it. I mean, I think it's a great quote.
Yes, no, I think that's a really deep and dark quote, and I like that.
Deep and dark, deep and dark.
Unlike some other guests whom I love and think were great, but they came with like really motivational quotes, and yours.
Well, it could be motivational for many things, but let's leave it there.
Ventura, do you have a quote?
I'm going to pass on this one. I'm sorry.
That's fine. You can make up by answering the next question really well. And that is the final question that I have for you. Who's the most brilliant or interesting person you've ever had the pleasure to meet?
I can tell you, it was my father. My father was, for me, the most entertaining person. I could talk to him for a long time, and I really miss him. I lost him many years ago, and he was very fascinating man. He had a strong influence who I am today.
Can you maybe briefly sort of explain what made him such a good father? Because I have a lot of people my age and they're just married and they're just becoming parents. So what made him so good?
Well, first of all, I was the last child, okay? And he was an old man when I was born. So I spent a lot of time with him. He didn't like children. So he talked to me as a person since I was very little. And I remember very clearly, I have to behave to be able to talk to him. So we would talk since I was like 6 or 7 about life, about things in life, about beliefs, about philosophy. He was he had been involved in politics. He had been also working in planning, urban planning, and that kind of thing, and also educational planning. So he had certain ideas, and he was a thinker. So it was very important because he had time to spend with me and talk to me.
That's a beautiful answer. Arturo, what about you?
Well, I'll go to the public side here. I love my father as well. Yeah, I mean, I admire her very much for a number of reasons. But you're gonna get from me, Cheyenne, the same response that anyone who has been to Caltech will give you. I mean, Richard Feynman. Yeah, I don't think he's probably the smartest person. I mean, leaving Einstein aside, I think he's probably the smartest guy who lived in the previous century. Certainly is the most important physicist of the second part of the 20th century, but he was a very special person, very charismatic, sharp as hell, and very ironic and anti-bureaucratic. Yeah, if you read his book, you will know what I'm talking about. It's a fascinating book. Surely you're joking, Mr. Feynman. Yeah?
You met him?
Yeah, he was a professor at Caltech when I was a student there. He was a very and he did very
Charismatic.
he was very charismatic, but he did very important work in physics. I mean, he won the Nobel Prize, but he did some very important work in quantum mechanics and electrodynamics. It's a very important guy.
Yeah, but can you like give an idea? Because charismatic, that could be anything. Like, what was it like meeting him in person and sort of?
He was a very engaging person. I mean, he was really very charming as a person, very persuasive. I mean, whenever he gave a talk or he was very, and he was very, I mean, he was very, for example, I mean, I'm gonna tell you one story that there was a topless bar in Pasadena where he used to go. So to work. And at one point, the city decided that it was a very kind of offensive, not very gentlemanlike behavior. I mean, and they wanted to shut down the place. So the owner went and talked to several of the patrons to see if they could step up and put a good word and say that actually it was not a criminal organization, it was just a friendly place where there were topless girls dancing. Yeah. And Feynman was the only one who volunteered to testify on behalf of the owner. Yeah, I mean, so he was that kind of guy. I mean, very a little bit not a mainstream guy, but he was very clever. Yeah.
It is so amazing because usually, like with these genius types, they'll have Asperger's syndrome, and so they might have an imbalance of the brain where they're highly intelligent, but then socially a bit awkward. But he was clearly.
No, he was not socially awkward. He was a very engaging person. I mean, he was not, if you had met him on the street, I mean, you would have never thought he was a physicist. I mean, he was not socially, he was not a social cripple, let me put it that way. Yeah.
Wow, that's an amazing anecdote. Thank you for sharing. So we've got a few questions. I'll go because I've kept you longer than I told I would. So I've got a few questions from the audience. Claudia says, "Dear speakers, to what extent is the emotional component, how strongly your work of art captures the heart and or mind of a specific person, predictable or measurable? Sometimes certain paintings rise significantly higher at auction than other works by the same artist, simply because two or more bidders are truly enamored with a work for sale."
Want to take that one or?
You take it.
Well, I mean, okay, clearly, in my view, certain paintings, obviously, I mean, think about Guernica by Picasso, for example, clearly beyond the artistic merits, there is a very strong political component there, yeah, and now you cannot separate that from the artistic part, yeah. There are certain paintings that they have a political statement and they're very weak artistically, but Guernica, for example, I could say is a painting that mix both. Yeah, you cannot separate those two, I believe. But
yes, but so of course in the book you argue that you
Not only a work of art captures the heart and mind
Well,
of specific, predictable or measurable. Well, since we are looking at the result of an auction. We're not looking at how the auction went, the process by which the bidding occurred, which is where you could see this whole thing about. You see the end result, and the end result, sure, might be sometimes way above the estimate because there were two people interested in the painting, but they could be interested not only because of the theme or the emotion, but because they want to fill something in their collection, that they have a vacuum or something else. One could be that they're really enamored from the piece, true, and really want to own it. But also it could even be something about the buyer, in a sense. I think that went on with the selling of the latest Da Vinci, where you had a bidding and it went all the way to 450
yes.
million.
For the audience, that's the Salvator Mundi that
Yes.
was
Yes,
bought by,
Salvador, yeah.
So in that case, it seems like there were two people bidding against each other on who wanted, because they wanted to own it. No matter what, it was kind of more of an ego issue.
But Ventura's point is valid in the sense of the collection. For example, I mean, if there are three paintings that were essentially together and then they become separate, if you are the owner of two and you're missing one, obviously the value of that painting for you is going to be a little bit higher in a way than a person who owns nothing. Yeah, I mean, it's there is a non-linear effect there, to put it mathematically, but which is emotional, obviously.
But there's a good point here that Claudia makes, in the sense that these
Yes.
things in the art market are very unpredictable as well.
Absolutely.
Absolutely, I would agree with that 100%.
And it goes a lot by what's going, it's becoming fashionable, or it's being talked about in different spheres.
So, Mr. Blee Goldman says, thanks for this interesting topic.
Mhm.
And then he has a few comments. As a fundamentally non-productive asset, e.g. one that does not generate cash or output like a company or farm, how can we disentangle contemporary norms around perceived aesthetic desirability and thus higher priced art and the inevitable survivorship and connoisseurship factors which will affect prices in hundreds of years?
Oh,
Well, I wish I could give you an answer for that. I don't really know. Yeah, it's a very interesting question. I couldn't make a prediction of any sort for 100 years. Yeah, I mean,
sometimes when we go on exhibition, you ask yourself that question about that particular artist. Will this artist survive kind of the pass of time? Will still be appealing in 100 years? Sometimes you don't know which of the artists that sell for millions of dollars today will still be considered valuable in 100 years. Who knows?
in fact, I will go even further. I mean, there are certain artists that were not very successful. I mean, financially, when they were alive, and they were discovered like 100 years ago or 50 years ago. Yeah, so it's a little bit. It's not like you're going to become successful right away. I mean, certain people have been successful 100 years after they die.
Yes, and for example, Albrecht Dürer's work was expensive, relatively speaking, in its time, but I mean that has exponentially grown over the ages. And like, you know, if your ancestors were clever, they would have bought up all those works by Dürer. And that's just a little cue about next week's topic. Dear authors, okay, I'll show. Dear authors, what's your take on sleeper hunting as a method of investing? Thank you.
Sleeper hunting, what do you mean by that? I'm not familiar with that.
Well,
sleeper
so as you're very much aware, of course, sleepers are like often paintings that have like a low estimate at the auction, but then they be worth much more. So sleepers in that sense.
Oh, okay.
Sometimes you could be buying a dot, in a sense that it's a low estimate.
You would need to buy a lot. Yeah, I mean, make sure one is not a loser, but I would not go
by that unless you really like the painting. That's another thing. It's a sleeper hunting, but of paintings that you like, because they're going to be a lot of dots.
I agree. Tech bros do not go sleeper hunting, but if you're a sort of very clever academic and you see something sort of interesting on the art market, go for it. Snap it up. Yeah. Okay, the last few comments are all by Eli. He says lol about the Okay, this is, I think, the final question. Credentialing for contemporary art is almost solely gatekept by the dealers and galleries to make the market. Would it not be better investment to invest in all the galleries? And then he says, it's a dead market. Everyone should just buy hers. Wait, go back to this. So what about this question?
So he's talking about the gatekeepers, the dealers. That's true. That's true. If you could invest in the galleries, but it's certain galleries are not very successful as a business, at least in the US. A lot of galleries that open do not survive in general. It's a very difficult business.
Yeah, I could go even further. I mean, if you look at the typical gallery, I mean, maybe the question is refers to Gagosian and the successful ones, but the typical gallery dies after 5 or 7 years. I mean, so starting in the US, yeah, I'm talking about the US. So a typical gallery doesn't live beyond 5 or 7 years. In fact, it's like a typical marriage. I mean, it doesn't go beyond that. Yeah. So it's a very risky proposition. And the ones that survive, actually, very few make a significant living. So I'm not sure if you were to invest in all the galleries, I mean, it will be a very successful business. I think it's a very risky proposition. Yeah.
This is how interesting.
Yeah, the survival rate. I'm going to give you 2 pieces of trivia here. So the rate of failure of a marriage or the divorce rate is comparable to a gallery. And if you buy a junk bond in the US, it's a lot less risky than investing in a gallery. Yeah.
Yeah. What a horrible carnage, like 5 years, all those dead galleries everywhere.
Oh, yeah, it's sad. It is sad.
It's very sad, but it's a very risky business. I mean, that's the painful reality. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And then Feynman is so amazing. What a great autobiography, an original thinker and a great man. Thanks for sharing, Arturo.
Oh.
And then the final comment, I think, is what excellent guests. A+.
Oh, he's a financial guy. I mean, what he should give us I know exactly what he means. Yeah. This is an inside joke, Sharon, but we are very grateful to receiving that grading. Yeah. So thank you very much. We really appreciate your attention.
I've heard of Blee Goldman is actually like he helps startups and he's also like an old master specialist. So I think coming from him, he's also like active in the financial market, I think. So that's a great compliment.
Well, we are very grateful and we appreciate the qualification and the comment. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Look, I'm sure there are many more comments coming in, but we can't answer all of them. So I would like to thank Dr. Cifuentes and Ventura, Charlin, for coming on. It's been a super interesting conversation. Now, is there anything you're working on at the moment? And where can my viewers find you or keep track of your highly interesting work?
Well, thank you very much. We really appreciate it.
You have a question there.
There is a question hidden in there. And that's, are you working on the next book right now? And like, where can people find you like, online?
We're not working on a next book.
No.
We're working on another piece of research. Okay. We're looking at abstract expressionist women, a couple of them, and seeing again their trajectory, their creative curves, see how they evolve, and see some issues there.
Okay, and then the final word goes to you. Is there anything else you would like to say, or?
No, thank you very much.
Thank
We're really
you so much
grateful for the opportunity.
It was a great interview. Thank you very much.
And vice versa. I'll be back next week with a mystery guest. So see you then and goodbye.
Goodbye.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Thank you.